The thing I would say about Parliament is it makes a fraud out of good people. Go in there with all the best intentions in the world. I'm going to do this, that and the other. Oh, no, you're not. You're going to vote like that and you're going to say this. You will all watch it and think, why are they talking like that? And it's because of the organisation of it, of Westminster politics.
This has been a long time coming. I just had a look. And I sent you the first message that said, "Hi mate, do you fancy this?" on the 21st of September 2023. So that's some schedule. Why do you do it? Not this, but, but as mayor, your schedule is insane.
Yeah, when I left Westminster, which is now 8 years ago, do you all feel old this morning? I've been the mayor for 8 years. I kind of thought I was signing up for a quieter life. And it's not played out like that. It is like all-consuming as a job, but I love it for that as well. You know, I'm a kind of person like that. I'm never half in something. You know, I've never just dipped my toe. I'm kind of all in or I'm not in kind of person. So, to be honest, this job, I've loved it so much more than anything I ever did in Westminster. I was 16 years there, and while it was an amazing privilege and got to do some really important things, none of it has matched the 8 years here. It's just different, isn't it? You're kind of right in the mix, aren't you? You're with people. And the thing about what we're doing in Greater Manchester is it's not just me, is it? We're all involved in it, aren't we? Everyone's playing their part in it. And that requires getting out and about everywhere and making sure everyone knows what we're trying to do, hopefully giving people a feeling of involvement and ownership of it, and that takes a bit of energy. So my energy levels are need topping up at times, but no, it's a brilliant job. I love it, but it's all consuming.
Well, we met first right at the start of that 8 years. People perhaps forget that pretty much the first week of taking office was the arena attack, wasn't it?
It was, yeah.
And the city's response to that was beautiful in many ways. One of those things was creatives gathering together, and you'll see the artwork around this room is from some of that then funded or contributed to the Mayor's Homelessness Fund.
It was amazing.
And so that gathering of creatives and stuff, I'm interested, is Andy Burnham creative?
I've written a book. I mean, that must be fairly creative. I think so. You know what they say about politicians, we're all failed rock stars, aren't they? What is it? Show business for ugly people is the way it. So I would have loved to have been in a band, definitely. And I'm of that generation. I was the classic mid-80s growing up in Greater Manchester, the Smiths being the be-all and end-all, and all of a sudden it was cool to like a bit of poetry, and they used to parade that around a bit. I was at that age when all of that was going on. So I ended up doing English at university, which is quite rare for a politician. Not many would have done English, but I did. And I had a massive argument with my dad about it. He kept saying, "Why, what's wrong with law, engineering, this, blah, blah, blah," and I found this. I used to be into this poet called Tony Harrison. I don't know if people know Tony Harrison, northern poet from Leeds, and he used to do sort of broadcast. They used to be on TV as poems. It had a big impact on me at the time. And one of his poems called V had a sort of a little epilogue from Arthur Scargill, no less. And this quote from Arthur Scargill said this: "My dad reads the dictionary every day. He says your life depends upon your power to master words." So I looked at that and went right to my dad, "Look at this. Arthur Scargill said this. English at university is the main thing you should be doing, not the lowest." I suppose to answer your question, I've been more. If I have some creative flair, it would be with words rather than music. Certainly not dancing, for anybody who saw me do a Strictly Come Dancing event last year, which just needs to be erased from the entire internet.
Good luck with that.
So, yeah, exactly.
30 people are searching it right now.
It's interesting though, I look back and I think absolutely it was good training for a career in politics, because just having, I'm not saying I'm brilliant at it, but I can, the power over words and just communicating and then letting people understand what you're saying and get behind it, is massively important part of my trade.
So that's a little bit of what inspires you personally. When you look at as mayor and with a plan for the city region, what are the areas, the other cities you look at for inspiration? Like, who's doing it well? Who are we trying to emulate?
Nowhere in the UK. I'm not saying that in a boastful way, but genuinely not. I just don't think anywhere has got more than what we have, I don't think, or is doing it better. They've got good things going on. I'm not being arrogant about that. And I look to Liverpool. They do good things around film. I think we could learn a bit from that. Bristol, there's a creative scene there in terms of animation and film. There's bits and bobs. You can Dundee gaming. There's lots of things that are out there that are good, but I don't think any other UK city brings the package together like we do.
And what about internationally?
I think I'm quite a big Hispanophile. I spent a lot of time in Spain. I think Bilbao was the original one that really did set the kind of trend of a post-industrial city, kind of leaning into creativity. But Valencia has done it. In more recent times. Some of the German cities, Berlin, I think, definitely a place that I feel an affinity with. So, yeah, I mean, the one thing about the mayoral world is, you make these connections with other mayors around the world, and it's fantastic. That's a brilliant thing, because it's in these divided times. It's just incredible how cities are all very like-minded wherever they are in the world in terms of the kind of often a more progressive view on life, quite passionate about creativity. The big one we've just signed actually is with Austin. We've just signed a sister city agreement with Austin at South by Southwest 2025, and we're a bit sore that they're going to London next week. But anyway, we'll leave. Not Austin. It's more the South by Southwest. They've gone there, but no, that's a major coup for us. And if you look at, for those of you who know Austin, the parallels with Manchester are incredible. They're really strong. So digital city, tech city, music city.
What will that do for us?
I think it can do a lot, to be honest, because the Texas economy is still a really big, it's a big thing to tap into, and all the stuff that's going on over there. It gets harder to do business over there, but they still are, huge market for us. But Austin's a lovely landing point into that slightly mad scene that we see over there. So I think we've really kind of pulled off a coup really with pulling off this relationship. So they're coming here next year. So the Mayor of Austin is bringing a delegation in the middle of 26. So that's the next thing. And they've set up a Manchester committee in Austin. So people who've got an affinity to Manchester are all on a committee, and we're setting the same up, or reverse here, an Austin committee. So anyone in your world who has any connections, wants to be on the committee, please let us know. You'd be more than welcome. We're sort of looking for willing volunteers at the moment.
I'll do that.
Okay.
I want to rewind to the start of your political career is as a researcher for Tessa Jowell, right?
Correct.
But your stock rises through the New Labour, Tony Blair era. For me, I'm a teenager at that point, but I remember it was the slickest I'd seen a political party, I think. It was the first, lots of parties had harnessed marketing and comms and all this sort of stuff. But there was something about New Labour that created a buzz, was using the media, was using all the marketing and comms techniques that felt central to what they were doing. Did you feel that at the time? And did you feel like you were smashing it?
No, not that last point. I mean, just a little bit more on my kind of journey. So I did English. My first job out of university was as an unpaid reporter on the Middleton Guardian.
We'll get to that.
Okay. And that was by the early 90s by then, and this place, you know, it was the polar opposite of what it is today. You know, things were closing, it was pretty difficult. Wanted to stay, couldn't find anything. And so I got a job on a transport publishing magazine called Container Management and Tank World. And it's the reason...
Just say that again, because we might miss it.
There was the most glamorous one was passenger rail management, but the other two were Tank World and Container Management.
I love it.
It's the reason why I've had, I think, definitely into double figures invites to go on Have I Got News For You? But I know they'll make... The reason why they keep asking is because Tank World's going to be guest publication of the week, and I'm absolutely not going on to see some of my old articles be broadcast in the country. And then it was working there that I was frustrated about the 1992 general election result. I was in this office full of Tories, to be honest, and I was like, Northern is still not quite fitting into London. And somebody was working there who was just like, she sort of could see I was a bit like out of sorts. She goes, oh, my stepmother got elected last night. So this is Eleanor Mills, who went on to be editor of the Sunday Times magazine, I think. But anyway, her stepmother was Tessa Jowell. So I got this kind of random break, but then was kind of catapulted into the sort of world of, you know, John Smith was still leader, but then, you know, the look I've had in many ways is, well, sometimes it's like that, isn't it? The things you'll know in your world, won't you? Things just happen and you couldn't have predicted. So it was like that for me. But then I was just in this thing, and yeah, it was impressive being part of it, seeing how Labour was in that opposition period going towards government. You know, the communications were just miles better than the major government at the time. You know, well, what couldn't be better than the Cohen's hotline? It wouldn't be that difficult, would it? But then in government, you know, because obviously then I was kind of a special advisor, then became an MP in 2001, and I was MP for Lee, for those who don't know, obviously not far from here, former mining area. That's where I grew up, and I knew really well, and it was very clear to me the slick comms and everything was not landing in where I was representing, and that to me, that gap was clear very early on, and it was a bit of a theme for me all through the time in government. I kept, you know, would always be saying at PLP meetings, Parliamentary Labour Party meetings, you know, this policy is not landing. You know, they were London-centric and still are, to be honest. The Labour Party is too London-centric, and it's, you know, never corrected that, in my view, sufficiently. And consequently, you know, I think not just them, but the other mainstream political parties have kind of created a disconnect, haven't they? And the comms can be too slick, can't it, in politics? And it was seen that way. Broadcasting, not really bottom up, and hence there's a problem.
The spin doctor accusations and the Alistair Campbell stuff was the negative side of that. But there was a positive in the sense that
the thick of it is a documentary for me, not a comedy.
Well, okay, so then Labour under Gordon Brown loses the election. You then step up as I was going to say contestant, that's not the right word, candidate.
It felt a bit like Blind Date at times.
As a candidate in the Labour leadership,
yep.
You finished fourth.
I did.
Which is still a Champions League spot. So, but it was out of 5, so that's a bit more Everton. But you, and I wrote this down because in that run-up, it was a bit like what you've just said here. You said the biggest thing that stands in the way of a Labour winning a general election is the lack of emotional connection we now have with people all over the UK, which I agree with you is still the case, I think.
I agree. I agree with myself.
But but as mayor, that feels like an area you've really succeeded in. I would say that emotional connection with the people of the city region.
I think it's got something to do, James, with the nature and style of politics at different levels. And obviously what I came into here was a chance to do things in a different way. The thing I would say about Parliament is it makes a fraud out of good people. Because you go in there with all the best intentions in the world. I'm going to do this, that and the other and campaign on this. And no, you're not. You're going to vote like that. And you're going to say this when you're in, you know, the 3-line whip of the voting approach, and then the line to take, you know, the party line. And I think it's a massive part of the reason why you will all watch it and think, why are they talking like that? Why don't they just, no, I believe this and I'm going to vote like that. And it's because of the organisation of it, of Westminster politics. I realised it was happening to me, in my time there. People, even my own family, were like, I can't believe you voted for that. And I said, well, I did argue against it in private, but what can you do? You can vote against it, but then you become sort of, your influence then just, you know what I mean? So that's the nature of it. I mean, the thing for me, the big moment in my life and in my career was Hillsborough, where as Culture Secretary in 2009, I was invited to the 20th anniversary of the Hillsborough disaster at Anfield, having been myself at the other semi-final on that day. And I had to make a choice big time. Was I going to go there and say some platitudes? Was I going to, even worse, send my apologies because I knew it was, or was I going to go and do something? And my family really said, look, go and do something for the families. And I kind of took that decision. But I knew when I walked out to face the COP that day, I was taking my first steps out of Westminster. I was literally breaking with the collective responsibility because they didn't know, the government didn't know I was there. I hadn't told anybody. So I'd kind of just gone rogue basically. And I went there saying I was going to try and reopen it, which at the time was completely sealed off. But so that, I don't know if that explains anything.
Well,
in
if
terms
you saw that footage as well, and that was a tough gig because I mean you were heckled from.
I was, but
a stadium.
In some ways, though, it was what I fully expected to happen. So when it did happen, it was like a relief. And it's always worse in life when you're waiting for something to happen. When it finally does, it's a relief when it does. But I knew that would, I knew I was going there and that would happen. I mean, it didn't make it any easier, but it was, a very conscious decision. And so, that was kind of then, I was then on a path out. I mean, I was never, somebody once said, I used to get briefings against me all the time down there, as they do, that Andy has left the reservation. And that was true. That was actually a true briefing. I was just not in the collective thing anymore. I was just going to call it more for here and Lee and people I knew and Liverpool supporters. And so basically when this job came up, increasingly I was like thinking maybe that is actually for me, that job. And it kind of came along and it matched my mindset. I'd really experienced Westminster, thought, well, I cannot, and I wouldn't be happy if I stayed any longer. And then this came along and it allowed a different way, a more independent approach to things. I always say place first, not party first. And I've tried to stick true to that all the way through. If you start with place first, I just think you start getting more calls right. And if you start with a party first lens, you just go into a sort of wrong space before you've even looked at the issue in front of you. So, I'm really, clear that is a reason why it connects better. Because most people most people in this room, people in Westminster just think party politics and how does this play against that vote? And people don't work and think like that, do you? You just think what's right and wrong, what's going to be good for us here in Greater Manchester, or what's not. And it's kind of, I feel these roles as mayor finally aligns politicians a bit more with the way people think and work, whereas Westminster politics really doesn't do that.
And, you look at this room full of Manchester's finest creatives,
we're in good hands, everyone. I'm happy.
You really are.
Young hands as well. I'm really.
This is my youngest daughter.
Nice to see you.
How do these guys help you tell that story? I mean, you do comms and.
Well, you do, and you did. When you brought that incredible book of Tony's poem after the arena, that was us at our best. In many ways, what you were doing there was straight away I was being shown the full creative power of the place, and I've really tried to lean into that with some pretty poor DJing stints and things, but I lean into everything that the creative world in the city is about, because you tell the story better than any politician, and that I think is why we are seen as the UK's most creative city region. So for me, and one of the reasons I'm here is just to kind of thank you for that, but do more of it. Keep doing it, keep redefining us. I think one thing where we do have to be a bit reflective is we do trade on past glories a bit too much, possibly, and I think we need to sort of say that what's the new Manchester? You can always hark to the factory and all that stuff we love, but how does that then find an expression in the now? And Manchester's good at that, isn't it? We're always good at the what's next, what's now, and I think you're the people to do that for us. And but I've in all of my sort of campaigns, I've sort of lent on all of that, the kind of creative world of GM, and we'll continue to do so.
You said 91. You graduated. You came back to Manchester. The creative landscape, was almost non-existent compared to what it is now. You applied for like Granada, BBC, all those things.
All of it.
So you clearly had a kind of, if we'd have had the world, the Manchester we have now, you probably would have had a creative career, not a political one, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Oh no, for sure.
But now you don't have to move to London. I did want to. You have a. As I was reading various articles and stuff, there's a little, influence that TV and creatives had on you. I think you first joined the Labour Party. One of the things you credit for that was a documentary or a drama that the BBC had.
Yeah.
Boys from the Black stuff. Right?
Well, it makes me feel old that you're talking about it like it's in the midst of. Rachel, you remember it, don't you? Yeah. I'm not the only one.
It was about unemployment in Liverpool.
It's just been turned into a play, actually. I think it's touring, actually. But Boys from the Black stuff, yeah, it was to say it was gritty, I think is an understatement. But an amazing writer called Alan Bleasdale, who depicted early 1980s Liverpool with a kind of a ferocity that you wouldn't, even now, I think it's such a powerful thing. But yeah, I mean, I have to be always careful where I admit this, but you've probably worked out by now. I was born in Liverpool. I do support Everton. I can't deny those the acceptable face of Merseyside football in Manchester. And for me, growing up, my mum and dad were never activists, weren't councillors. No one in my immediate world was in politics, although it was political, as Scouse families often tend to be. And when Boys in the Black stuff came on, it was kind of our world, because I used to go to watch Everton in that era, and you could see similar, and that was kind of where I started to sort of become quite politicised. So that was the early 1980s. I remember one episode, the last one actually, where an old docker is being pushed around in a wheelchair around the Albert Dock, but it was derelict at that point. That was like George's last ride, it was called. But I remember my mum was just tears streaming down her face because her family was all Irish dockers by background. So it was quite close to home. Then in the mid 80s, the miners' strike happened, and I was growing up in the Lee area, and Parkside Colliery at St Newtonley Willows was where my school bus went past. So the miners' strike, you kind of had the Toxteth and Moss Side riots of the early 80s, which kind of brought the 80s quite close to home. The miners' strike brought it a bit closer still, because I knew lots of people's dads who were out on strike in that period. But then Hillsborough was people I knew, people I went to school with, who were then blamed for killing 97 people. So that's how the 80s unfolded. So I became sort of quite, I guess, radicalised by all of that. But I was at Cambridge, and I was at home from university in 89 in my Easter term, where I was living was just in this sort of traumatised condition about Hillsborough. I go back to Cambridge and no one's talking about it. This idea of the country as two worlds, I'm afraid, is still the case. I think we very much are two worlds. The pandemic brought that out, didn't it? There were people staying at home and there were people out working. The Brexit referendum, the same. There were people who some people didn't even know a Leave vote, and other people didn't know a Remain voter. This is Britain's problem, I think, and it's kind of my political career has been defined by that, really, kind of challenging this idea of the country as two worlds, challenging the kind of sense that the North can always be treated as second class, and It's people as second-class citizens. So.
Well, the reason I mention that documentary is because often we're working on stuff creatively and you never know who's watching and what it says to them. And,
Exactly.
And, you know, I doubt very much that anyone who made that show thought, you know, some 15-year-old's going to watch this and join a party and later become part of the cabinet, later become a leader. So I think it's a brilliant story for creatives to hear, because when we make the stuff that's on our heart to make, rather than necessarily for the client that comes, or you know, sometimes for that as well, but you never know who it inspires to do what.
It's a really amazing point that you're making there, James, but I would say even harder for you now. You know, the 80s was kind of hard, but in some ways an easy thing to document because of, you know, the way in which things were, and you know, the obvious big social strifes of that time. But look at the time we're in now. You know, it's how you kind of make sense of this it's a harder thing, isn't it? You know, the world is getting darker, isn't it? It's getting more divided, and that worries me at this. I'm sure it worries you. You know, what is the right answer to this? And you know, I'm not saying anything other than the alienation that politicians have created is a big part of it, but there are certainly then quite malign forces using that alienation, aren't they, for different reasons? And yeah, it's a tough time, isn't it? To, you know, and what is the response of the creative world in that moment? It's how do you because always I think in the creative world you like us are trying to kind of find points of unity, aren't you, in the world? You know, how can everyone look at something and say, all right, that resonates, that relates, and I get that. So maybe it is about coming back to telling individual stories about our common humanity, isn't it, as opposed to what social media is pumping out, which is quite divisive material, unfortunately.
And I think you saw it no better exemplified than in Tony Walsh in that square, who at a time when none of us had the words, none of us knew even what to feel, he in his creative way gave us those words, showed us how to feel, gave us permission to, you know, that tragedy, you know, moments after that tragedy, and we're sat weeping, but also laughing, also celebrating, also, you know, and there's something in the creative that does that. You think of songs, you know, when that resonate with you, or you take you back somewhere, and all that sort of stuff. I think we do have a role in leading, and certainly a positive.
It makes the point
expression.
better than I made before, the example you've just given, because in that moment, you know, Manchester's most difficult moment, it was the creative community that gave it its voice back and its confidence back, and I saw visibly that happen that night. You know, I was standing right behind Tony, and you hear a phrase, and you rise to the occasion. Tony physically did that. I was like, I saw him. You know, I was thinking, God, how's he going to handle this? And his body like almost like got bigger, and his voice then filled the streets, and yeah, it was something that I'll certainly never forget. But it's the best example probably you'll ever get of this world that you're in, doing more to guide the place than any politician, you know. And to be fair, it was actually Richard Lees, the ex-leader of Manchester City Council, who said there'll be no politician speeches. And it was a real education for me out of Westminster. It was the middle of the general election, people forget that. You know, every political leader wanted to speak at that vigil. And Richard and me had to say, no, none of you are. So they all had to stand behind, and Tony gave that speech. That was Manchester in a nutshell, really, what happened that time.
I want to, we're over time already, but you've given us a little bit of leeway, so I appreciate that. We talked about the landscape, the creative landscape being totally different now. You were still championing that and progressing it. I wonder if I don't want to talk about B Network, because we've had loads of that and we understand it, and it really is transformational. But what I did want to talk about is, I mean, you can talk about it if you want, but
I have to get yellow buses.
But there's a couple of things that people, as I've been looking, that they might not know, are things like the MBAC and the B line. Do you want to tell us a little bit of what
Yeah.
it is?
So go back to that theme of two worlds. I think that is entrenched in our education system because under all governments of all colours, the university route has dominated to the exclusion almost of anything for kids who want a technical education. And actually in your world, you know, there's so much opportunity, isn't there, for young people to come on non-traditional routes to your world. And yeah, I kind of really despair at how they are just almost forgotten, really, in the way the school system is currently organised, and particularly how creativity has been pushed right out of the curriculum. You know, there is this thing called the English Baccalaureate, which is the traditional GCSEs, and schools are judged on their performance on those kind of narrow traditional GCSEs. No place for art and design, no place for drama, you know, no place for music. I mean, how does that make any sense from an economic point of view when you've got a creative city like this and the talent that's coming through and you don't let it find its way and its voice in schools? Completely wrong. But it's wrong from just a kind of human level, isn't it? You know, why shouldn't a kid who's immensely talented in those things, in creative things, have their day in school where they're the one shining in front of everybody, you know? And I really can't bear that, actually. I think it's such a kind of wrong turn that they took when they did all of that. So the MBAC is designed to correct that, and it's about two paths at 14. There's the academic path that works really well for those who want to take it, but this is about a technical path for the kids growing up here. And if you look, Beeline is a tool linked to the MBAC, which allows kids to get visibility of the jobs in Manchester right now. So, you know, going on, and at the end of the kind of sectoral gateways that we've got, and creative is, you know, very much one of them, they can see actual jobs in the GM economy, and then what are the steps that they could take, you know, BTEC or T-level or, you know, other things towards them. So it's trying to correct something that the country nationally has never fixed, and it's frustrating because I still have my own government sort of trying to fight me on it. But it's a classic example of that sort of Westminster sort of like, oh, the focus groups say do this, and you know, you just then leave so many kids growing up here without that clarity about what they could do. 2/3 of kids in Greater Manchester don't take the English Baccalaureate, and 2/3 do not go on the traditional university route. And you know, are we doing anything like enough for them? No. And this is some of the most creative streetwise talent you could find anywhere in the world. I keep kind of coming up with this phrase, and I hope it resonates or makes sense to people. Where Greater Manchester is right now is young people growing up in our 10 boroughs can see the skyscrapers, but I don't think they can see a path for themselves to these places. And I don't think they can imagine themselves working, even in, you know, a building like this or one of those new buildings. So if you actually open it up to give them that feeling that they can, and they definitely can with the right help, I think that's the next chapter here, isn't it? Where we're really drawing on all of our talent in all of our boroughs. That is how Manchester goes from where we are to an even higher level. So yeah, I'm on a real mission with it, to be honest. And I, you know, think your world could really both benefit from the MBAC, but really build it with us. You know, and actually, I think it's wonderful that you've gathered people like this, James, because I know a lot of people in the room, you know, working freelance or in small entities. I think what we've got to try and do is network the creative world to create the placements and the pathways. You know, because it's a harder thing to do in your world, isn't it? But absolutely, we must do it. I think because you know there is so much talent out there that we're currently missing.
Brilliant. I have a couple of quick-fire questions for you.
They always worry me when
coming to land.
Quick-fire.
Quick-fire ones. Well,
they're always the worst.
Let's see. I think we might know the answer to this already, but you can have one Manchester music artist or entity on your playlist. You have to get rid of everything else.
Yeah.
Which band or artist is it?
I've changed over this. I'm going to say New Order.
Ooh.
Yeah, I think they're the most timeless of all of them. You know, different generations can all buy in, and yeah,
right.
There we are.
I thought you were going to say
New Order. It is
but
mayoral edict.
All right. You can die having scored the winning goal for Everton at Wembley to lift the FA Cup trophy, or have Prime Minister on your CV.
Definitely. It's not close to the former. There's that, 100%. Yeah. And I'm not saying that for any effect. It's just true.
What's the best piece of advice you've been given?
Well, my brother, when I was talking about that Hillsborough thing, he's my younger brother John said, "Go if you're going to do something for the families, but if you're going to be a politician, don't go." And so that always sticks in my mind. But there was if I think the kind of thing that's guided me most, there was an MP in Greater Manchester, in South Manchester actually, called Paul Goggins. I don't know if people remember the name. You do, Rachel, don't you? Yeah. Paul was the MP for Wythenshawe and Sale East, and a really incredible, like an exception to the norm. And he kind of mentored me a lot it's not a quick fire, is it? Well, I'll just say it really quickly. He mentored me a lot. And I remember him saying something once, because everyone there'd been one night in Westminster when everyone had been at a spectator do or something, and there was all of this, New Labour was currying favour and all the power brokers. And Paul said to me, we had kind of had this pint afterwards, he said, he goes, "I don't know what you made of that." He said, "But I found it quite sickening." He said, "Why do people come in here and get power by coming in here to then give that power to the people who've got power? You should come in here and give your power to people without power." And to me, it was like a moment of, kind of in my heart, I knew that was the right thing, but he made me really go, right, okay, I got it. Yeah, it was like a massive thing in my political career. That was like and it was the best advice I'd had, because Paul would raise causes that no other MP would touch, and he kind of set my path a bit then to do some of the things I did on Hillsborough, infected blood and other things. So yeah, but that's how politics works, isn't it? They're often using power for people who've already got it, and it's what's one of the many things that's wrong with politics. Let's just put it that way.
And I'll probably just skip this now, but
God knows what that was.
You have got a room full of Manchester creatives. What would your final words be for these guys?
Oh God, I feel pressure now of
not like you're about to die.
Come up with something profound. I think firstly, I would say, well, I said it before. Thanks for organising events like this, but thanks for all being here, in that you're part of this network. And the thing that I feel more and more as I get older is this is maybe sounds a bit political, but I don't think outright competition gets you where you want to be. I think the future's about collaboration, isn't it? Clever collaboration, networks of people. I think the most highly networked, collaborative cities will be the most successful. And I think in your world, collaboration is the key, isn't it? When you're making those connections and coming up with those original things. That, to me, that's what it's all about. So clearly you are working like that. I think you're kind of quintessential Manchester, if I would say, because of the way that we are. That's the B, isn't it? The B symbolises that, and I did put it on the buses for a reason. It's the way I describe it is, this has got to be a city where no one is more important than anyone else, and that's going to be true in the creative world as well. Everyone's got a part to play. Everyone's got to be visible in the creative world. I think sometimes some can be invisible in the creative world, and it's team. Your world is team if it's nothing else. It's not nothing if it's not team, isn't it? So yeah, I think I would just say make sure you've got visibility of everyone in your network and kind of where they are, and because there's still a lot of unfairness in the creative world, isn't there, or it can be, and the pandemic showed that. The treatment of freelancers and self-employed was quite shocking, actually, and I think it kind of revealed how the country doesn't value you enough. But I think for us, the more you do what you do, the more you build the creative strength of Manchester, the more you're building our brand and our strength. And we massively thank you for it. I think we could do more for you. I don't think we've got our creative strategy as well developed as it might be. We're going to do more on film and television quite soon. We feel there's a bit of a weakness there. We do focus on music a lot. I think there's more we could do around animation and gaming. So yeah, there's more we could do for you, but the main thing is keep doing what you're doing, but do more of it, I guess, is the simple answer to your question.
Andy, thank you. I think in a world where we often look to Whitehall and London and Parliament and think, where are the good people? I think we're fortunate to have Andy as our Mayor of Greater Manchester. Thank you for your words, but more importantly, thank you for taking the time to spend with us. It speaks volumes about your support for our sector and us. Can we thank Andy?
No worries. Thanks, guys. Thank you.